Veronica stared at the hospital bill in her hands and realized something terrifying. If she didn't find $250,000 before morning, her father was going to die. And by the end of that same night, Veronica agreed to marry a man she had never met. It wasn't just any man. It was Kaiwan, the most dangerous man in the city. A man who never believed in love, didn't trust women, and had no idea if she existed when his mother arranged the marriage behind his back. But the worst part wasn't marrying him. It was the rule made on the first night, because eventually Kaiwan would become the first person to break it. Veronica had been sitting in the hospital corridor for 2 hours. The bill in her hand had a number at the bottom that she looked at so many times. An abstract problem that happened to determine whether her father lived or died. Her father had been admitted 4 days ago. The surgery he needed wasn't optional, that's what the doctor had said. $250,000 father surgery, as if the only obstacle was her understanding of the situation, not the reality of her bank account. She was still sitting there when a woman looking expensive and confident sat down beside her. She didn't introduce herself immediately. She sat for a moment as if she was resting. Then she placed a card on the empty seat between them. "My name is Mrs. Cho," she said. "I know who you are, Veronica. I know why you're sitting here. And I think I can help you." Veronica looked at the card. It felt like a trap, but it was the only invitation she'd had. She finally met the woman's gaze. "I don't know who you are, ma'am." "No, but you will." She folded her hands in her lap. "My son needs a wife and you need money. I'd like to discuss whether those two problems can solve each other." Veronica almost laughed. "Your son." "Is your son?" The woman said the name. The corridor stayed quiet. "What? Kaiwan, the notorious Mafia, don't care about women nor their feelings." Veronica had heard that name the way everyone in the city heard it, in careful conversations, in things people said, and then immediately walked back. She'd never had a reason to think about what it meant up close because she had no business with it then. But right now she was thinking about it. "He doesn't know I'm here," Mrs. Cho said. "The arrangement will be handled through the family. Kaiwan will be informed when the time is right." "You're arranging your son's marriage without telling him." "You throwing me to a shark?" "No, dear. I'm solving a problem my son refuses to solve himself," she said. "He is 34 years old. He runs an empire and he runs it well. But there are things that empire requires that he has been too stubborn to address. A wife is one of them. I have been patient." Veronica stared down at the bill still in her hands. "What would I get?" "Everything on that paper," Mrs. Cho said. "Every bill, treatment. Whatever your father needs for as long as he needs it. Covered completely. In exchange, you marry my son and you give this marriage a real effort." Veronica thought about her father's face the last time he was awake. The way he looked at her like he was sorry for all of it, for being sick, for needing her, for the weight of it landing on her shoulders. She'd told him not to be sorry. She meant it. "Does he know anything?" she asked. "He will know he's getting married. He won't know the specifics of how it came together." "If he refuses," for the first time, something moved across Mrs. Cho's face that might have been worry. "Leave Kaiwan to me," which told Veronica everything about how certain she actually was. But the number was still at the bottom of the bill, and her father was still on the other side of that door. "'Kay, I accept your offer," Veronica said. The morning of the wedding, Veronica sat in front of a mirror in a room and let a woman she'd never met do her hair. She wasn't nervous. She didn't think about the moment or how her future would look like. Her mind was somewhere else. Thinking about the conversation she had with her father 2 days ago when she told him she was getting married. He looked at her while in his sick bed for a long time and asked, "Is this what you want?" She smiled. "I want you to get better, Dad. This helps." "This is my only chance and I promise it will be okay." He hadn't asked more than that. He knew her well enough to know she'd already made the decision before she told him, and she never unmade decisions she already made. "Be careful," he'd said. "I'm always careful." It seemed he wanted to say more. He didn't. She'd held his hand for a while and then gone to finish what she'd started. Now she sat still while the stylist behind her worked and she thought, "I can do this. It's a transaction. They're of endpoint." The doors opened and she walked in and saw Kaiwan for the first time. She'd built a picture of him from reputation, cold, hard, the kind of man who took up a certain kind of space. The picture wasn't wrong, but pictures don't prepare you for the full thing. He was standing at the end of the room with his hands loose at his sides, and he was watching her walk toward him with an expression that gave her absolutely nothing. She kept her movement even. She didn't look away from him. She already made it clear to herself she wasn't going to make herself small in front of this man, not on the first day or any other days ahead. She reached the end of the aisle and finally stood in front of him. Kaiwan looked at her once, not like a groom looking at a bride, like a man assessing a situation. No smile at all, then he looked away. For some reason, that bothered Veronica more than if he had been cruel. The ceremony was short. Words were said, documents and signatures were given. 12 minutes start to finish. When it was done, Mrs. Cho looked satisfied. Veronica didn't really put that into consideration. All she wanted was her father treated. In the car, Kaiwan sat beside her with his arm along the back of the seat, not touching her, and said nothing for the first 5 minutes. Then, "I know this wasn't your idea." She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "It wasn't yours either." Not going to pretend to be something I'm not," he said. "I don't think you'd want that anyway." "I wouldn't." "Then we understand each other." "We're starting to," she said. She felt him look at her. But there was something in that exchange. She'd married a stranger and a ruthless mafia for that matter. She'd done it for reasons that had nothing to do with him. What she hadn't expected was for the stranger to be this direct about it. She stayed focused while he looked away, realizing she didn't know who this man was at all. But for the first time, she was terrified to find out. They arrived at the house. It was a house that had never been a home and seemed to know it. Veronica moved through it the first evening like she was learning the environment of an unknown land. She kept her reactions off her face. Kaiwan showed her the room that was hers. It was at the opposite end of the hall from his. She's been prepared for that to be a talk. It wasn't. "This is your room," Kaiwan said. That was it, no welcome or an attempt to make her comfortable. He stood with one hand in his pocket, already looking mentally elsewhere. Veronica looked around the massive room. It was beautiful, and somehow still felt temporary. "If you need anything," he said. "The staff handles it." "It's fine," she said. "Thank you." He nodded once and then he said, "I want to get something out of the way." She waited. "Let's get one thing straight," he said. "My mother sold you a fairy tale. I'm telling you the reality. This is a contract, not a romance. You stay on your side of the house, I stay on mine. Don't go looking for things that aren't there. I really don't know what my mom told you or how she convinced you to marry me. This marriage stays simple." "Simple? You're kidding, right?" She laughed, though it sounded jagged. "Supposed to live in the same house and pretend we're ghosts?" Veronica asked. "No emotions and expectations, rule to keep. Don't fall in love." She crossed her arms. "You say that like you've had experience." His jaw tightened a bit. "More than enough," he said. She almost wanted to smile. Not because it was funny, because she had this exact conversation with herself the entire drive over, and here he was saying it out loud so she didn't have to. "You mean don't fall in love," she said plainly. "You heard me right. And also my private life or whatever I do is none of your business. I hope you understand that too. Kaiwan." She folded her arms. "I didn't walk in here with illusions about what this is. I made a choice not based on feelings. I'm not going to develop feelings for a man I married 6 hours ago because someone in a movie did." He studied her. Good then. The silence between them felt like a dare. They looked at each other for a moment. Two people who had just shaken hands on a rule neither of them thought they'd have to fight to keep. They were both wrong about that. The first week, Veronica didn't think about it. Kaiwan was barely home. He moved through his world with whatever voltage that world required of him, and she moved through hers, and the house was large enough that they could occupy it for days without crossing paths. She set up her space. Called the hospital to confirm the payment had gone through. It had all of it immediately. She sat, the relief was physical. She hadn't realized how much weight she'd been carrying until she felt it lift. She visited her father the next morning. He looked better already. Plus, knowing the shadow that had been sitting over him since the bills started mounting had lifted too. He could breathe again. "You look tired," he told her. "I'm fine." "You're always fine. That's what worries me." She squeezed his hand. "Focus on getting better. That's your job right now." She drove home to a house that wasn't hers yet and was not sure it ever would be. Then Kaiwan came home in the morning and she happened to be in the kitchen, and neither of them had prepared for the other to be awake. He stopped in the doorway. She was making breakfast. She turned to stare at him over her shoulder, read nothing on his face except something that sat just behind his eyes. "Pancake," she said. "Sure," he said. He sat down at the island. She made 2 plates and left his in front of him and stood on the other side with hers. He ate it. Didn't explain the hour or whatever had made his mood that way. She didn't ask. Afterward, his private life, he stated clearly, has no business with hers. When the plate was empty, he said, "You don't interrogate." "Would you tell me anything if I did? You made rules." "No, I wouldn't tell you anything." "Then what's the point?" He paused. For the first time, the cold, impenetrable mask he wore slipped, replaced by a glint of genuine, dark amusement. "Enjoy the rest of your day," he said. "You too," she said. And he left. She didn't think about that moment until later at night when she's in bed, and then she thought about it longer than she meant to, and then she told herself to stop. The house settled into a rhythm that Veronica hadn't expected. At first, the halls felt like a maze, but soon she learned the quiet language of the place. She knew the exact creak of the floorboard in the west wing that signaled Kaiwan was packing, and the way the morning light hit the kitchen island when the staff had finished their pre-dawn shift. The silence here wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the weight of the secrets Kaiwan carried behind his office door. She stopped trying to map out her days and started just existing in the space between the silence. She learned the distinction of his phone calls, the sharp,
I have
clipped
to go
tone he
now.
used when things were falling apart, and the low, steady murmur that meant he was back in control of his empire. She wasn't just living in a house anymore. She was learning a man's pulse. And she realized with a quiet jolt that she was starting to recognize his moods before he even walked into the room. He learned her too, what she likes and dislike, her favorite stuffs and color. They both told themselves this was just two cautious people learning each other. Then there was the night she found him in his private room at 2 a.m. with a glass of water on the table and a silence that had a different quality than his usual silences. She should have walked past, but she stood in the doorway instead. Bad night, he looked up. You should be asleep. I wanted water. She leaned against the doorframe. You don't have to tell me what it is. I'm just asking if you're okay. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said, which was the first honest answer he'd given her to any question about himself. She nodded, went and got her water. On the way back, she stopped at the door again. Bet it'll look different in the morning, she said. It always does. Kaiwan said to himself, why does she care about how I'm doing? Her words gives me hope. Oh no, I shouldn't be thinking this way. He just looked at her and then she passed to her room and went to bed. The next morning he was already gone by the time she came down, but there was coffee made, a full pot, still warm, and she stood in the kitchen looking at it and thought. He knew what time I'd come down. She poured a cup. She didn't picture what that meant. 2 months into their marriage, Kaiwan told her there was an event she needed to attend with him. Okay, she said. It won't be pleasant, he said. These are not pleasant people. Any of your people pleasant? She asked. He thought about it. Some of them. She wore something simple on Friday. Not the role of a woman who belonged on the arm of someone powerful. She just got dressed and went with him, and that simplicity was the thing that turned heads before she even walked all the way into the room. The evening was exactly what Kaiwan had said it would be. People performing things beneath the surface of polite behavior. Conversations that weren't really one. Eyes scanning everything. She held herself the same way she always did, and that stillness, that refusal to adjust her posture for the room, was the thing that made her visible even when she was being quiet. Kaiwan noticed. He has been watching her navigate the room from across it, and there was something in how he watched her. The man was standing 2 groups away from her when he said something not directly to her. To the man beside him, but pitched just loose enough that it carried. That even the woman next to Veronica went carefully still like she heard nothing. Veronica heard it, what the man said. She just took one slow breath and looked at the woman beside her and continued the sentence she'd been in the middle of. Because she believes not reacting and say nothing was the best thing to do. She didn't see what happened across the room. But she felt it, the change in temperature, the way the conversation around her dimmed slightly, the way people's eyes moved toward something behind her and then very carefully moved away. She turned around eventually. The man was standing very still with Kaiwan 3 feet in front of him and nothing good in Kaiwan's face. The exchange was quiet. She couldn't hear the words from where she stood. But by the end of the night, the man had left early. The rest of the room had adjusted itself around Veronica. Nobody looked sideways at her for the remaining 2 hours in the car home. She looked at Kaiwan. Whatever you did out there today, you didn't have to do it. I know. Kaiwan, it's done. He looked out the window. He won't make that mistake again. She stared at his profile. What did you say to him? Nothing that requires repeating itself. She turned back to her window. She had married a man who didn't take women seriously. She was realizing a version of him that existed in rooms like that one. But she was in the other version of the room. She'd been living in it for 2 months. The version of him in those rooms was different. She stared out the window at the city lights moving past and had a self-talk with herself that she wasn't ready to finish. And when they got home, she went directly to her room and closed the door, then sat on the edge of her bed. She was in trouble and hoped it would resolve on its own. That instinct was wrong. Kaiwan found the file on a Thursday. He was going through a stack of old correspondence, something operational, routine, and it was just there between two other folders, his mother's handwriting on the tab, unremarkable. He opened it. He read for a long time without moving. Not what his mother had told him, this was the original file, the actual document. The notes from Mrs. Cho's first visit to the hospital. The bill total she'd seen Veronica holding. The number. The terms laid out in plain language. She had found a woman at the lowest point of her life. A woman with a sick father and a bill she could not pay and no remaining options. And she had walked in and handed her a contract wrapped up like a lifeline. And she took it. Not because she was innocent sincerity, but the love for her father and saving him was more than she protected herself. Kaiwan sat at his desk with the paper in his hands and did not move for a long time. He'd known this marriage wasn't Veronica's first choice. He'd understood that from the beginning. It was an arrangement, she'd agreed. Everyone understood the terms. What he didn't know was the ground it had been built on. How desperate she was. Exactly how little choice she actually had. What it cost her to walk into that room and say yes. He closed the file. He thought about the woman who had been in his house for 2 months, who had never once made him feel guilty for the situation. Either does she asked him for more than he'd offered. He'd spent 2 months telling himself his interest in her was casual. He sat at his desk with that file and understood cleanly. He found her in the compound near the pool that evening. She was reading when she heard him. She looked up and whatever was on his face made her close the book without a word. He sat down across from her. "I found something today," he said. "A file, my mother's notes from before the wedding." He watched her go still. "Real thing," he said. "Not what I was given." She observed him. Her face was careful, but her hands on the closed book were too still. "No, about the hospital," he said. "About the bills, what you were holding when she found you." He exhaled slowly. "I know exactly what she offered you and you had no option because you wanted your dad saved." Veronica said nothing. "She walked into the worst night of your life," he said, "and she used it. She found what you couldn't afford to say no to and a contract was built around it." He looked at her steadily. "That's what brought you here." "Me finish." She stopped. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it wasn't me who made that decision, but it's my family and it's my name and I'm not going to let it sit there unaddressed." A pause. "You came into this marriage already carrying something that wasn't fair, and then I stood in your room on the first night and laid out rules as if you'd walked in here with options. You didn't, and I'm sorry
I'm
for that."
sorry my family took your worst situation and made a deal.
Veronica stiffened, her pulse jumping at her throat. She didn't offer him a quick forgiveness. Instead, she turned the heavy book over in her lap, tracing the grain of the cover. When she finally lifted her gaze, the sharpness in her eyes was tempered by the exhaustion of the last 2 months. "The bills are paid," she said finally. "My father had his surgery. He's doing well." She looked down at the book in her lap. "I made a choice, Kaiwan. I knew what I was agreeing to." "You knew a version of it. But I'm still here. I want you to be here and not go anyway, Vero. Even before today, I was already falling in love with you. I just couldn't stop myself. I started coming home earlier because of you. I made coffee because I knew when you woke up. I watched rooms differently when you were inside them. I broke the rule long before I admitted it." Veronica studied him for a long time then. "You started coming home earlier." "Yes, months ago, I noticed." "I know you noticed." "I told myself you were just tired of being out late." "I know what you told yourself." She almost smiled. "The dinner, the way you, that had nothing to do with business." "I know," she said quietly. "I knew that night." She looked down. "I just wasn't ready to know it out loud." He didn't say anything. He just looked at her. "Don't," she said. "What?" "At me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're relieved." "I am relieved," he said. "Kaiwan," she said. "Yes, this still started badly." "I know." "Your mother used my father illness bill against me." "I know. You're going to have to be very patient with me working through that." "Of course," he said. "I'm not asking you to be fine with it. I'm asking you to let me be here while you're not fine with it." She looked at him. She picked up her book and stood. He watched her. She remained rooted to the spot, the book pressed against her chest like a shield she no longer felt the need to hold. She stared at him, not the version of the man the city whispered about. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make dinner." He stood. He followed her in. And that was how it ended, just a woman who had every reason to keep the wall up, deciding, quietly and on her own terms, that she was done keeping it. He understood what she'd just given him. He didn't take it lightly. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Cho arrived at the house for her usual visit and found the entrance hall stacked with luggage. The housekeeper appeared before she could ask. "Leaving," she said simply. "Mr. Kaiwan said they'll be back in 2 weeks." Cho looked at the bags, then at the closed front door. He didn't say where. She stood there for a moment. Then she nodded once, the nod of a woman who had spent years managing her son and had just realized for the first time that he didn't need managing anymore. She left without going inside. At the airport, Veronica looked at the departures board and then at Kaiwan. Not going to tell me. If I hate it, you won't. You don't know that. Because you can't hate our first ever honeymoon together. She smiled at him. I want to make you the happiest woman on earth. Kaiwan said. On the plane, she sat beside him and looked out the window as the city fell away beneath them. Kaiwan, she said. Thank you. He turned to look at her. For what? Everything. Thank you too for coming into my life, even at your very least. Kaiwan said. She leaned her head against his shoulder and his hand found hers on the armrest. Join the family for more exclusive stories. See you in the next one, my people. Remember, I still remain your writer and director. Charles.